The home required renovation work, so I disposed of the vehicle. We all have to make compromises, don't we? Ronald remarked with a careless gesture, never lifting his gaze from the daily paper. I remained motionless in the drive, gazing at the vacant spot where my metallic SUV ought to have been stationed, the automobile I dedicated 3 years to financing, the one holding my emergency roadside equipment, the family photographs I'd been converting to digital format, and the computer case containing all my professional documents. You disposed of my vehicle without consulting me. My words seemed far away, as though they emerged from another person. Ronald at last looked up, wearing an expression mixing irritation with condescension. Your mother and I had a conversation about it. The ceiling has water damage and your vehicle was simply sitting unused during your absence. It wasn't as if you were driving it. I searched the kitchen for my mother, discovering her bent over the wash basin, scrubbing a pan with excessive force. Mother, were you aware of this? She didn't rotate toward me. Ronald manages our financial matters. Dear, you understand that. My identity is Millie Jameson, age 32, and until 5 minutes prior, I worked as a financial analyst returning home to Portland following a profitable work trip. I dedicated the week in Chicago securing a significant client contract, anticipating sleeping in my personal bed, and perhaps driving along the shoreline this weekend in my currently absent automobile. Where are my belongings that were inside the vehicle? I inquired, attempting to maintain vocal control. Storage area, I believe. Ronald gestured carelessly toward the house's rear. Some fellow named Jerry purchased it, provided us with a reasonable price considering everything. That automobile had accumulated considerable mileage. Jerry who? I insisted. Did you obtain his contact details? Ronald exhaled dramatically. What's the point? The transaction is complete. Be supportive for once, Millie. Your mother and I have been permitting you to reside here without charge for months. I suppressed the reminder that I'd relocated temporarily to assist them when Ronald lost his construction employment, that I'd been covering groceries, utilities, and half their home loan despite maintaining my own apartment that now remained vacant, that the rent-free arrangement had been their proposal when they faced property seizure. Instead, I proceeded silently to the storage area, where I discovered my possessions carelessly thrown into a plastic container. My laptop was absent, as was the external storage device containing my backup information. Those electronic items brought a good price as well, Ronald announced from the entrance, as though reading my mind. Jerry added an additional $300 for them. Should handle the plumber's invoice. As I observed him, something frigid and distinct formed in my chest. This wasn't merely about the automobile. This concerned authority, Ronald's requirement to demonstrate it, and his basic conviction that anything I possessed was ultimately his to eliminate. What he was unaware of was how tremendously mistaken he was. My mother wed Ronald Weber 4 years earlier following a rapid 6-month romance that commenced when he renovated her kitchen. He appeared charming then, self-assured, competent, filled with grand schemes and grander commitments. I was 28, residing in Seattle and developing my career at an investment company. I traveled home for their modest wedding, genuinely hoping Ronald would bring my mother happiness after 10 years of solitude following my father's passing. The initial warning signs emerged just months following the honeymoon. Ronald's construction enterprise began having difficulties, with clients complaining about incomplete work and permit infractions. He blamed the financial climate, unreasonable customers, envious competitors, never himself. Then came the alcohol consumption, the wagering debts, the collection agency calls that my mother attempted to conceal from me during our weekly video conversations. A year ago, I transferred to my company's Portland branch and relocated to my mother's residence temporarily when the lending institution threatened foreclosure. I plan to remain for 1 month while assisting them in restructuring their finances. 1 month extended to 3, then 6. As I uncovered the genuine scope of their financial difficulties, it's temporary until Ronald recovers financially. My mother would say, her eyes both optimistic and apologetic. I developed budgets that Ronald disregarded. I settled bills he overlooked. I established automatic transfers from my account to theirs to handle essential expenses. When I proposed, Ronald seeks steady employment rather than pursuing elusive construction projects. He became defensive. I refuse to work a time clock for some corporation at my age, he declared. I have opportunities lined up, significant ones. The opportunities never came to fruition, but his resentment of my financial contributions increased. He started making snide remarks about charity and temporary aid, as though I were a government assistance program rather than family. He questioned my spending practices while making unnecessary purchases himself. He borrowed my credit card for fuel, then acted insulted when I requested repayment. Still, I remained, partially for my mother's benefit and partially because I was making headway. Their mortgage was current again. The credit card balances were gradually decreasing. I'd even assisted my mother in opening a separate savings account, encouraging her to rebuild her emergency fund in case Ronald's grand opportunities never materialized. What Ronald didn't realize, what I had intentionally concealed from him, was that 6 months earlier, my mother had added me as a joint account holder on their primary checking account. It was intended as a practical measure, allowing me to manage bills more efficiently while Ronald concentrated on rebuilding his enterprise. Let's not inform Ronald just yet, my mother had whispered as we departed the bank. He's sensitive regarding financial matters. He might perceive it as meddling. I had agreed, not wanting to generate tension in their marriage. Now, staring at the empty location where my car had been, I questioned if that had been an error. The following morning, I awakened early and examined my bank's mobile application. The deposit from Ronald's sale of my car hadn't appeared yet. I dressed for work, my movements automatic as I attempted to process the violation I'd experienced and determine my subsequent actions. In the kitchen, my mother was already preparing coffee, her shoulders tense. I apologize about your car, honey, she said quietly. Ronald should have consulted with you first. Yes, he should have. I accepted the cup she offered. Mother, this cannot continue. I require my own transportation. I have employment, obligations. I understand. We'll resolve something. Ronald says once the ceiling is repaired, he can concentrate on that bathroom renovation project for the Millers. That should generate enough for a down payment on a used car for you, the Millers. I'd heard about this supposedly profitable job for months, yet it never seemed to advance beyond the planning phase. When is that occurring? I asked. My mother's eyes shifted away from mine. Soon, they're just finalizing some details. Before I could press further, Ronald shuffled into the kitchen, appearing pleased with himself. Morning, ladies, he announced, helping himself to coffee. Roofers arriving today. Good thing we had that car money, eh, Millie? I said nothing, which he seemed to interpret as agreement. By the way, he continued, I used your printer last night. Hope you don't mind. Had to get some invoices out. I froze mid-sip. My printer was in my bedroom, which meant he'd entered my private space without permission again. What invoices? I asked. Got a lead on a new client. Needed to look professional. He tapped his temple knowingly. Business strategy. As I departed for work, I noticed fresh tire tracks in the mud beside the driveway, as if someone had driven. Across our lawn, our elderly neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, was watering her flowers and waved me over. I was going to call your mother, she said in a hushed voice. That man who bought your car came back last night. He and your stepfather were loading things into a truck. I thought you should know. A chill ran through me. What things? Mrs. Patterson shrugged. Couldn't see clearly in the dark. Boxes. Some. Furniture maybe. They were trying to be quiet about it. I thanked her and drove to work in my rental car, my mind racing. What else had Ronald sold? What else was missing that I hadn't yet noticed? During my lunch break, I called the bank where my mother and I held our joint account. The balance was significantly lower than it should have been. There was a withdrawal yesterday. The representative informed me $5,000 cash. The roof repair was supposed to cost $1,200. The car had sold for nearly $8,000 according to Ronald. When I returned home that evening, the roofer's truck was nowhere to be seen. No repairs had been started. Ronald's car was gone too, and my mother sat at the kitchen table. Her eyes red from crying. "He's gone," she whispered. Took the money and left. Said he'd be back in a few days once he sorted some things out. I sat beside her, taking her trembling. Hands in mine. "Mom, what's really going on?" "I think Ronald has a gambling problem," my mother confessed, her voice barely audible. "He's been disappearing with large amounts of money, coming back empty-handed. When I ask questions, he gets defensive or makes up stories about business investments." The admission explained so much. The chronic money shortages despite my contributions. Ronald's erratic behavior, the mysterious business prospects that never materialized. "How long have you known?" I asked gently. "Suspected for months, known for certain about 3 weeks." "I found iOS in his wallet from someone named Vince. Thousands of dollars." She looked up, her eyes haunted. I confronted him. He promised to stop, to get help. He seemed sincere. "Then your car ... He sold my car to pay a gambling debt," I concluded flatly. My mother nodded miserably. "Probably." "And now he's taken the money from our account too." I spent the weekend helping my mother piece together the extent of Ronald's deception. We found pawn tickets for her jewelry, including her first wedding ring from my father. We discovered credit cards opened in her name that she knew nothing about. We uncovered a second phone with threatening text messages from creditors. On Monday morning, I went to work early to use the company's secure internet connection. I logged into the joint account I shared with my mother and enabled notifications for any transaction, no matter how small. Then I called my bank to freeze my personal accounts and credit cards. By Wednesday, Ronald still hadn't returned. My mother was frantic, alternating between worrying for his safety and anger at his betrayal. I suggested she file a police report, but she resisted. "He's still my husband, Millie." What if he's in real trouble? What if someone's threatening him? Her loyalty, even now, was both admirable and frustrating. I focused instead on practical measures, helping her close vulnerable accounts and document what was missing. Thursday night, my phone pinged with a transaction alert: $2,000 withdrawal from our joint account made at an ATM in a neighboring town. I showed my mother the notification with grim satisfaction. "At least now we know he's alive," she nodded, relief battling with betrayal in her expression. "What do we do now? We protect what's left," I decided. "First thing tomorrow, we're going to the bank." The bank manager's office was quiet and discreet as my mother signed the paperwork to remove Ronald from her accounts. She'd brought identification, marriage certificate, and bank statements, everything needed to assert control over her finances. "I'll need to close this joint account entirely," she explained to the manager, "and open a new one with just myself and my daughter as authorized users." The manager nodded sympathetically. "That's perfectly understandable, Mrs. Weber. We can make that happen today." As we were completing the paperwork, my phone rang. Ronald's number. I stepped outside to take the call. "Where the hell is my money?" he demanded without preamble. I tried to make a withdrawal and the account's frozen. "Where's my car?" I countered. "And my laptop, and my mother's retirement fund." "Don't get smart with me," he snarled. "I needed that money for an important business opportunity." "Your mother understood that." She agreed. No, she didn't. She never agreed to any of this. "Put her on the phone," he demanded. "This is between me and my wife. She's busy right now." "Closing your access to her accounts, actually." There was a moment of stunned silence before Ronald's voice turned cajoling. "Look, Millie, I know how this must seem, but I'm about to turn everything around. I've got a sure thing this time, to double or triple our investment. We just need to trust each other here." His practiced smoothness, the easy lies, I could finally hear them clearly, and I could see how they had worked on my mother for so long. "Come home, Ronald," I said, matching his reasonable tone. "Let's talk this through like family. That's more like it," he replied, audibly relieved. "I'll be there tonight. We'll sort everything out." As I ended the call, I felt a grim resolve solidify within me. Ronald was coming home thinking he could talk his way out of this, manipulate us again. He thought he'd found another opportunity to exploit our trust. Instead, he was walking into a reckoning. Ronald arrived that evening with flowers for my mother and a box of expensive chocolates for me, peace offerings purchased with our money. He entered the house with the confidence of someone who had escaped consequences all his life. "Ladies, I know I have some explaining to do," he began, his practiced charm on full display. "But first, I want to apologize for the worrying I caused." My mother sat stiffly on the couch, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. I remained standing, watching him perform his contrition with a detachment that felt almost clinical. "I made a mistake," he continued, "a serious one, but I've learned my lesson. In fact, I've already taken steps to make things right." From his jacket pocket, he produced a check and handed it to me with a flourish. "For your car. It's not the full amount yet, but it's a start. I know how much that vehicle meant to you." I examined the check. $5,000 from an account I didn't recognize. Made out in messy handwriting, the bank name was obscured by a coffee stain. Whether deliberately or accidentally, I couldn't tell. "Where did this money come from?" I asked. Ronald's smile faltered slightly. "A business associate. He owed me for some consulting work." "Which associate?" "You wouldn't know him. Construction industry guy." Ronald turned to my mother, clearly trying to redirect the conversation. "Catherine, I know you're upset, but I've got great news. Remember that development deal I told you about? It's happening. Contracts being drawn up as we speak. 6 figures, minimum." My mother's expression remained unchanged. "You said that 3 months ago about the West Side project, and before that, the restaurant renovation. This is different," Ronald insisted. "It's a sure thing. I decided to test a theory." "Is Vince involved in this deal?" Ronald froze momentarily before recovering. "Vince? No. This is with Henderson Properties." "Totally legitimate. Interesting," I said. "Because there is no Henderson Properties in Portland." I checked. The facade cracked just slightly, a tightening around the eyes, a forced chuckle. "Not Portland. They're based in Seattle, expanding to our market." I pulled out my phone and showed him the screen, a banking app displaying a balance of 0 in the joint account he had shared with my mother. "Looking for this?" I asked quietly. His expression darkened. "What did you do?" "Protected my mother's assets." "The account is closed. You had no right." Ronald's charm evaporated, replaced by indignation. "That's my money too." "Actually, it wasn't," I replied calmly. "Mom opened that account with her inheritance long before she met you. You were added as a joint holder, but the funds were hers. And what little you contributed was more than offset by what you withdrew for gambling." Ronald turned to my mother, switching tactics again. "Catherine, are you going to let her talk to me like this?" "I'm your husband." My mother took a deep breath. "I found the pawn tickets, Ronald, for my mother's jewelry. For James's wedding ring. James, my father." The mention of his name seemed to catch Ronald off guard. "I can explain that," he began. "And I found these," she continued, placing a stack of papers on the coffee table. "Credit card statements for accounts in my name that I never opened." "That's identity theft, Ronald." His face flushed with anger. "You're overreacting. Married. Couples share finances. I was handling things. By selling my daughter's car. By gambling away our savings." My mother's voice rose slightly. "By lying to me for years." Ronald stood abruptly. "I don't have to listen to this. I made some mistakes, sure, but I'm still the man of this house." As he moved toward the door, I stepped into his path. "Before you go, there's something else you should know. I handed him a folder containing documents my mother and I had carefully prepared, bank statements showing the pattern of withdrawals coinciding with his gambling activities, credit reports revealing the fraudulent accounts, and finally, a formal statement my mother had filed with the police that morning. Not a missing person report, but a complaint of financial exploitation and fraud. What is this? He demanded, flipping through the pages. Evidence. I replied simply. Of everything. Ronald's face contorted with rage. You scheming little? He stopped himself, visibly forcing a calmer demeanor. This proves nothing. It'll be your word against mine. Actually, came a new voice from the dining room doorway. It won't be. My cousin Brent, a police detective, stepped into view along with a uniformed officer I didn't recognize. Ronald's expression shifted from shock to calculation to a desperate, ugly anger as he realized he'd been outmaneuvered. In that moment, I saw him clearly for what he truly was, not a charming entrepreneur with bad luck, but a predator who had targeted my vulnerable mother and never expected to be held accountable. Ronald Weber, Brent said formally, we'd like you to come downtown to answer some questions. After Ronald was escorted from the house, my mother collapsed onto the couch, her composure finally breaking. Did I do the right thing? She whispered, tears streaming down her face. He's still my husband. I sat beside her, holding her hand. You did the brave thing, the necessary thing. Brent returned an hour later with news Ronald was being held for questioning related to financial fraud and identity theft. A search of his car had revealed my stolen laptop along with financial documents belonging to at least two other women previous victims. Presumably, it's not your fault, Brent told my mother gently. Men like Ronald are practiced manipulators. They target kind people, especially widows with assets. The next morning brought a new shock. Brent called to inform us that Ronald had been released on bail, paid by someone named Vincent Barron, the same Vince from the AITA we'd found, a known associate of some problematic characters, Brent explained. Cryptically, we're keeping an eye on the situation, but I'd suggest you both stay somewhere else for a few days. Just as a precaution, we packed overnight bags and checked into a hotel across town. That evening, my phone rang with a call from our neighbor, Mrs. Patterson. There's a truck at your house, she reported nervously. Men are loading furniture into it. I thanked her and immediately called Brent, who promised to send officers to investigate. 20 minutes later, he called back. Ronald and two associates were removing items from the house. They claimed Ronald was just collecting his personal belongings, which he has a legal right to do until divorce proceedings formalize the separation of assets. What did they take? My mother asked when I relayed this information. Brent didn't specify, I admitted. We'll have to inventory when we return. When we were allowed back home 2 days later, the extent of Ronald's vindictiveness became clear. He had taken not just his clothes and personal items, but also electronics, kitchen appliances, and even family photos, things he knew had sentimental value to my mother. Most concerning, her filing cabinet had been emptied, potentially including sensitive financial and identity documents. This feels like punishment, my mother said, surveying the half-empty house, for standing up to him. It is, I agreed, but it also means he's scared. He's lashing out because he knows we have evidence against him. That evidence, however, was now at risk. Many of our carefully gathered documents had been in the filing cabinet. Without them, the case against Ronald would be significantly weakened. I called Brent in a panic. He took our evidence, not all of it, Brent reassured me. The formal statements and copies of the key documents are safe with us. But anything you had at home, ... double quotes. I hung up and sat heavily on the stripped couch, trying to think. What else did we have? What else could we use? Then it hit me. Mom, remember that safety deposit box Dad insisted you keep? The one with your important documents? Her eyes widened. At First National? I haven't accessed it in years. The next morning, we were at the bank when it opened. The safety deposit box contained exactly what we needed. original copies of my mother's financial documents from before her marriage, including statements from the accounts Ronald had drained, the property deed showing the house belonged solely to my mother, and, most crucially, a thumb drive my father had apparently left behind. The drive contained a detailed accounting system, my father's meticulous financial records, which my mother had continued updating out of habit for years after his death. It showed every deposit, every withdrawal, and every transaction in accounts Ronald had accessed. It was a complete financial history that would definitively prove which assets belonged to my mother before marriage and trace exactly how Ronald had systematically exploited them. Dad was always organized, I said softly, scrolling through the files. He always said good records were the best protection. My mother squeezed my hand. He would be so proud of you, Millie. I know I am. With the retrieved evidence securely copied and provided to Brent, we returned home to find Ronald waiting in our driveway. Ronald leaned against his car, a calculated casualness in his posture. When he saw us, he straightened, adjusting his jacket with the nervous gesture I'd come to recognize as his toe. "Catherine, we need to talk," he called as we approached, alone. My mother's steps faltered, but she didn't stop walking. "Anything you have to say, you can say in front of Millie." His expression hardened. "This is between husband and wife, not anymore," she replied, her voice steady. "My lawyer filed separation papers this morning." This clearly wasn't the reception he'd expected. Ronald's charm offensive switched on immediately. "Look, I know things got out of hand, but we can work this out. That detective has it all wrong. I was just trying to protect our assets, manage things properly." By stealing my identity, my mother asked. By pawning my wedding ring from James, Ronald's eyes flicked to me, his expression darkening. "This is her doing, isn't it? Turning you against me." "She's always been jealous of our relationship." I said nothing, letting my mother handle this last confrontation in her own way. "No, Ronald. This is your doing." She withdrew a folded paper from her purse and held it out. "This is a restraining order. You're not welcome here anymore." He ignored the document, his face flushing with anger. "You can't do this. Half of everything is mine by law." "Actually," I interjected, "that's not how it works when fraud is involved. Everything you took from accounts that existed before your marriage, that's theft. The credit cards you opened in Mom's name, that's identity theft. The documented pattern of financial exploitation of a widow, that's elder abuse." Ronald's composure cracked completely. "You think you're so smart, don't you, with your fancy financial job and your little spreadsheets? You've got no idea who you're dealing with." "We know exactly who we're dealing with," I replied calmly, "and so do the police, the district attorney, and the 3 other women who've come forward since your arrest." That stopped him cold. "What women? What are you talking about?" My mother stepped forward, a strength in her posture I hadn't seen in years. "Take the restraining order, Ronald. And if you ever come near my daughter or me again, I'll personally make sure you spend the next decade in prison." In the weeks that followed, Ronald's carefully constructed world collapsed completely. The district attorney charged him with multiple counts of fraud, identity theft, and financial exploitation. His gambling debts caught up with him when Vince Barron, revealed to be a loan shark with connections to organized crime, decided Ronald was more liability than asset. My mother filed for divorce with a detailed accounting of Ronald's financial abuses, ensuring she retained the house and all assets that were rightfully hers. 3 other women, all widows around my mother's age, came forward with similar stories of exploitation, creating a pattern of predatory behavior that the prosecutor was eager to highlight. Most satisfyingly, my car was located and returned through an investigation of the fraudulent sale. My laptop was recovered too, its contents providing even more evidence of Ronald's schemes. 6 months later, Ronald accepted a plea deal of 5 years in prison, restitution to all victims, and a permanent record that would prevent him from ever targeting vulnerable women again. The night after his sentencing, my mother and I sat on her porch swing, watching the sunset with glasses of wine in hand. I keep thinking about all the red flags I ignored, she said softly. How did I not see it? He was good at what he did, I replied. And you wanted to see the best in him. There's no shame in that, she smiled, the lingering sadness in her eyes beginning to fade. Your father would be so proud of you, Millie. I know I am. I thought about the invisible line Ronald had crossed the moment he decided my car, my possessions, my very autonomy were his to control. He'd never imagined I would draw a different line, one he couldn't manipulate or erase. I'm proud of us both, I said, clinking my glass against hers. Here's to new beginnings. The house still needed a new roof, but now, for the first time in years, it truly felt like home again.